Hello. Welcome back to the Madiswan channel. My name is Madison, and today we have a very special episode of True Crime and Society. Today, we will be discussing the My Lai Massacre. Now, like I stated in my Hiroshima and Nagasaki True Crime and Society video, this month is Asian American and Pacific Islander History Month. The month of May is that month, and we are going to be centering their stories when it comes to the true crime aspect of this channel. So if you haven't picked up on it already, I did a Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing deep dive and why that was a true crime story last week or 2 weeks ago. Do the math. You can go check that video out. And this week we are going to be discussing the My Lai Massacre, a massacre that happened during the Vietnam War, which is credited for really changing a lot of people's opinions about the war here in mainland America. So we'll get into all of that. We'll get into the history. We'll get into that conversation in this episode. So stay tuned. And before we get into it, I just want to let you guys know that I love you. I appreciate your support. I love you guys so much. There's so many new things happening on this channel. I keep getting hit up for more true crime interviews, which I'm really excited about. Like, you guys don't understand. It's something that I'm super passionate about in the sense that this would be a natural progression for my channel. So I have already 2 lined up that I'm going to be doing in the next couple months, and I hope you guys show as much support as you can for those videos. Again, my first interview is my most viewed video of all time on my channel, and I just did one last month, the month of April, on the case of Kayla Barfield. Again, you can go to that video, look at the pinned comment, and see how you can help her family get justice. It is an unsolved case. It's very intense. So if you want to hear from her family's perspective what's been going on and what happened to their loved one, please check out that video. Please like and follow and all of those things. If you are new here, hello, my name is Madison. I like to do true crime with a sociological twist. We do dark history here. We do social commentary here. There's a little bit for everybody here. So please join the family, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you are notified whenever I post a new video. And if you are returning, I love you guys so much. Thank you for your undying support for this channel. Please like this video, comment down below, show some interaction with this video so we can get the algorithmic juju on it and go crazy. For both groups of people, if you're new or you're returning, you better know to watch those motherfucking ads and follow me on my socials in the description. So the My Lai Massacre is dark. So I'm just going to go ahead and put in a trigger warning immediately. If you've never heard of it, if you are sensitive to sexual assaults, violent, aggressive, military action, violence in general, violence against children, all of that, this is not the episode for you. And I just want to say that off the top, just so we're not triggering anybody that could be really especially triggered by this story. I do think it's an incredibly important point in American history to discuss because of all the politics around this massacre happening. But again, I'm going to be detailed. I'm going to be talking about things that really could send someone spiraling. So if that's you, if you're sensitive to those topics, catch me on my next video or watch an old one. Now, the My Lai Massacre is one of the most famous massacres that happened in Vietnam. It got national attention and someone was actually put into prison for their involvement of that within the massacre, which is rare because these types of massacres actually happened a lot of the time. Now, I think I need to rewind a little bit. If you guys weren't here last year for my Agent Orange video where I did a pretty good, very quick explanation of the Vietnam War, I'm going to do an even quicker explanation of the Vietnam War right off the dome of my head. So it's going to be vibes based, not accuracy based. So stick with me. If you don't know, the time period between World War II to the end of the Vietnam War is one of my absolute favorite times in history to research. I took several classes in college around this time period, and It's just something that for some reason is the time period that I think is the most important turning point in America. And one of the main things that changed America's course was the involvement in the Vietnam War. It still has far-reaching effects to this day. The fact that we don't have a draft, the fact that they don't show actual war footage on the news anymore, just overall feelings about distrusting the government, all of that really stemmed with the Vietnam War and really started to froth up with the exposure of the My Lai Massacre to the American public. Now, Vietnam, I'll give you a very quick history. Again, go back to the Agent Orange video for you to check that out. I do a much bigger deep dive of all of that kind of thing in that video, so feel free to check that one out. But here we go, really quick. Vietnam was a proxy war of the Cold War. Now, if you don't know, right after World War II ended, we had a very new enemy, which was the Soviet Union. Even though we were fighting on the same side of World War II, we were already gunning for them because they were communists. And to the American leadership, that was a direct attack on their capitalistic ways. So they became the natural new enemy, even though we were working together in World War II to defeat the axis of evil. Now, as soon as 1945, the war ends, we are automatically entering into the Cold War. Let your mama tell you, I don't know, there was not any kind of break between those wars. We are automatically entered into the Cold War. So you have things like the Cuban Missile Crisis, you have things like in the 50s, you have things like Korea in the 50s, which we do not talk about, and maybe next year I'll do a video on that. We have Vietnam in the late 50s, early 60s, and all of these other proxy wars in Central and South America, Africa, and the Middle East that kind of reflect this same idea of fighting against communism. Now, Vietnam is a country that was colonized many, many times by China, by the French, and during the end of World War II, the French were the colonial power in Vietnam. And they were having issues because the local leader, Ho Chi Minh, his name is Ho Chi Minh City is Saigon, it's a whole thing. But Ho Chi Minh had gone to the meeting of what would soon become the United Nations and basically asked after World War II, hey, we want to be independent. We'd like independence from the colonial powers. Please let us be an independent nation. Of course, Western nations didn't pay attention, didn't pay any mind. So then the revolution against the colonial French started. And Ho Chi Minh was very inspired by the American Revolution. And so he felt like appealing to America and saying, we're just like you. You were a colony of England. Please let it help us secure our independence from this colony. But because we are allies with the French, that was against our personal interests. So we supported the French in this war. The French were losing bad. They were not being able to handle it. They didn't have enough money, especially after World War II. They were struggling to maintain control in Vietnam. So what did we do? We started sending money. Then we started sending arms. Then we started sending our soldiers to train their soldiers. And we started to send, planes and gear and all of that kind of stuff. Then we started going to Vietnam to help in an observational sense. Then France left because they kind of got out of Dodge, even though this whole thing started with them, and we basically took over for French in Vietnam. Now there's North Vietnam and there's South Vietnam, and North Vietnam wanted communism, South Vietnam, they were saying wanted, democracy, American-led and controlled democracy. That being said, that's how the war began. That's what the war was fought about. And that's how we slowly became more and more involved until it became our war and not us helping the French get control of their colony kind of thing. This war lasted from the late 50s into the late 70s. So it was another 20-year big death toll, lots of money war. America loves to be in a long war. And it was one of the biggest shames in American history. When you think about Vietnam and why it ended, and how the Vietnam vets were treated and all of these things, it was a huge shame. A lot of the things that were going on in Vietnam that America was perpetuating was terrible, disgusting, and deplorable. But also the fact that there's no clear winner, and we were definitely the clear loser in that war, especially because this was a small, scrappy colony and we were a big nation coming off of the high of World War II. It was expected to be a very quick situation, but it turned into a over 20-something year-long feat that we ended up having to give up. No matter what they try and tell you in history, we lost that war fair and square, and we shouldn't have been there in the first place. Now, there's a lot of complications with Vietnam. I mean, there's a lot of layers to it. The time period, civil rights, all wrapped up into that. We have communism versus capitalism. We have class issues. We have the draft. We have the anti-war campaigns in mainland America. We have the overall break of the trust from between the American government and its people, because the Vietnam Papers came out and basically exposed the American government to lying to its people for how long they had been in Vietnam and how many people had actually died and how much money was being spent in Vietnam. That being said, it is the turning point in my mind. If I could pinpoint a real turning point, that would be a real turning point in terms of the negativity that started to infiltrate this nation on a wide scale. Obviously, as a Black person, that's a whole nother conversation, but you get what I mean. Now, what happened in My Lai was one of many massacres that occurred because American soldiers were overworked, underpaid, and basically trained to see everyone in Vietnam as the enemy, even though they were preaching in mainland America that they were saving the people of Vietnam from communism, when in fact we were terrorizing anyone who looked Vietnamese. Period. On March 16th, 1968, 22 American helicopters were heading to Pinkville, which was an area in Vietnam that was named based on how it looked on a tactical map. There was so much population was so dense in Pinkville that as it was, looked at on the map, it showed up as pink. So that's what they called it. The name stuck, and that's, essentially where My Lai is located, in Pinkville. And these 22 helicopters were basically going to hunt down a particularly brutal group of Viet Cong that had been terrorizing single-handedly the American soldiers in that area for months at this point in time. And they got a tip that this particular group of the Viet Cong were located hiding in Pinkville at this particular time, at this particular place. So 22 helicopters were instructed to go there and kind of do a tactical mission to eliminate these particularly brutal group of Viet Cong enemies. Now, on one of these helicopters was a man named Lieutenant Calley, and we are going to talk more about him later. But Lieutenant Calley was 25 years old. He thought he would be able to be successful and gain success and kind of build himself up through the war, through the military, but he wasn't really good at his job. He was kind of mediocre and was called out several times for being mediocre, and he kind of had, a little chip on his shoulder about where he was versus where he wanted to be and how he wanted to be respected and remembered. Now, on top of that, he had a very particular disdain for the Vietnamese. It didn't matter if they were South Vietnamese or North Vietnamese. He had a very particular disdain for the Vietnamese in general, based on his, as he would put it, experiences out in the field. So he was particularly a bitter man, and he was in one of these helicopters, presiding over his group of men, and this was their mission to go in and kind of get these particularly violent people out and take them out. Now, Callie was a part of Charlie Company, who is inevitably responsible for what happened in My Lai that particular day. Now, months prior, they had been in the wilderness, doing some sort of operation, when they set up camp and they heard screams for miles and miles away all night long. It kept them awake all night long, just loud screams. And eventually, when the sun broke, they got up to go investigate what was going on, and they found that there was an American soldier whose skin was completely peeled off by the Vietnamese, by the Viet Cong, specifically by this group of Viet Cong people that they were told and tipped off were in Pinkville on March 16th. So they had a previous encounter with this group before, and they find this soldier who had been tortured all night. His skin was completely peeled off, and they would throw salt water on his exposed muscles and stuff like that. They were feeding him water to keep him alive so they can torture him more in the evening. And so that really, I guess, for Charlie Company was a defining moment and really stuck with them in terms of who the Viet Cong were and what we needed to do. We at that moment in time, they were like, we're getting revenge for what happened to this particular soldier, and it stuck with them. So when they were tipped off that this group of people were in Pinkville, they were ready, they were roaring, they were bitter, and they were ready for revenge, period. Now, I think it's important to stop here just to say, the complications between who's an enemy, who's a friend, and what side of the line you stand on when it comes to the Vietnam War is very complex. The reality is the real victims were everybody. The draft particularly focused on people who were poor, people who were black, all of that. So there was a predatory nature to the draft. In terms of the American government, if you were rich and you were privileged, you can kind of see your way out of that. Shouts out to Donald Trump. But on top of that, when you're over in Vietnam, it is very clear it's the Americans versus the Vietnamese, period. And so from that perspective, you hear a story like that and you say, wow, they heard someone being tortured all night. That would be triggering. That would be traumatizing. These men saw some ish that was sick and grimy. They did. And they experienced some crazy, traumatizing things. They saw a lot of crazy stuff. But that being said, when you flip it and you look at it from the Vietnamese perspective, you understand and you see that these people were doing whatever they could to fight against the invaders. They wanted independence. They were going to do whatever it took to do that. So they were going to peel the skin off of a soldier in order to strike fear into the American soldiers. They were going to do that because in their perspective, they were fighting till the last of them were wiped out for their independence. They were fighting to the death for their independence. So nothing was too dramatic and nothing was too brutal. And when you hear about what some of the American soldiers were doing, it was very much you go low, we go lower type of energy. And that's wartime. So, they were feeling an intense bubbling up of revenge. And if you see it from that perspective, that's only one perspective, but there's multiple. When you see it and you add it onto the Vietnamese perspective, you kind of are able to understand, but we did invade them. So what did you expect them to do? Sit down and be excited? No, they're going to peel the skin off of a human to strike fear in you, and that's just what it is. And it did strike fear in them. But this was the defining moment for Charlie Company that they held on and remembered with them for the rest of time. For months and months, they were waiting till their time to strike against this particular group, and this was their supposed time. Now, before, when they were kind of getting briefed about this particular assignment, there's lots of debate of what was said in that briefing with the higher ups. The higher ups obviously are in denial about what was said, but what was understood in by Charlie Company was the higher ups told them to kill everything that moves. Now, here's a quick overview of what they were supposed to do. Basically, in Pinkville, there were specific days where the women, children, and elderly would leave the village and go to the market to sell their goods. And this particular day was one of those days. So the villages essentially would be cleared out of people, and the VC who were hiding within the villages would be left within the villages. Simple enough. So they were waiting for the women, the children, the elderly to leave those villages to sell their goods. They would infiltrate, kill everyone that was still there, that was assumed to be, VC, and then they would go about their business and move forward and move on with their day. That's what was supposed to happen. Then they were also, and based off of that tactical assessment, the higher ups told them, when they go and see anyone in the village, your orders are to kill anything that moves. Now, to me, this is vague. To me, there's no okay, you will tell who's VC and who's not VC by what they're wearing, or you're gonna, interview these people and then take them in as POWs, and then from there get more information on how to get this group in totality. There was nothing like that. It was very much the good people will leave at this particular time, then you go in and kill whoever's left. And that was a tactical mission. Already a mistake. Already a fucking mistake, because in this war, what a lot of people don't get, and why a lot of these things happened, was how the men were trained. This wasn't, I'm in my battle gear, you're in your battle gear, we're marching to a cleared out space and we are shooting our guns at each other and we're keeping it on the battlefield, and that's how it is. Remember, I told you in Hiroshima, that's how wars used to be fought. Then in World War I, the trench warfare and different, bombings that happened, mustard gas, there started to be this blurring of a line between civilian and soldier. Then in World War II, they doubled down on that and said, you know what? There is no line between civilian and soldier. We're bombing innocent people to put pressure on our enemies. And that became a war tactic. Now in Vietnam, there was no in between. There was no distinction. And that's what they were actually being trained to be trained to understand, because in Vietnam, they weren't using normal tactical ways to attack the United States Army. They were using guerrilla warfare, which essentially is based upon different points of sabotage, things you can't expect, booby traps, different things that were put into the Vietnamese jungle by the Viet Cong because they knew the terrain. So they were able to hide, they were able to camouflage, they were able to use, poison, they were able to use crazy booby traps. I remember when I went to Vietnam, I saw one, and what they would do is dig a hole and put these sharpened stakes, like bamboo stakes, at the bottom of this really deep hole, cover this tip of the stakes with feces, and then cover that up with, loose leaves and stuff like that. The soldiers would step in, they'd get impaled, they'd be fucking fucked because, there's also feces in their wound. Do you know what I'm saying? So that was their style of warfare. So the blurring from World War I to World War II, the line being non-existent, to now the difference between a soldier and a civilian when it comes to fighting in this way is there's no such thing. It could be a woman, it could be a child, it could be anybody. Now, I say good for the Viet Cong because at the end of the day, they were defending their land. So they were enlisting everybody, and women were involved. Everyone is involved to make sure that they were able to seek the independence that they desired. That being said, though, it created this level of paranoia with the American soldier. You never knew if somebody was a spy or if somebody was, going to this little child you're giving something to was going to then tell, the other people where your position was, and then, what I mean, they'll sabotage you later when you're sleeping, or know where your camp is and shoot you up later while you're, sleeping or away, or raid you or whatever. So there was this deep level of paranoia combined with the intense brutality, the drug use, the charge time that they were living in general. These soldiers were a fucking wreck. Okay? They were not fit to do anything that they were doing, particularly something like this. Now, going back to My Lai and setting that story up, when you are under that kind of pressure and stress and paranoia at all hours of every day of your fucking life, and then your tactical mission isn't specific at all about who you're targeting, who gave you the information, what they look like specifically, what they're wearing, how you can distinguish them, then you go in there and see just different people, Vietnamese people who could very well just be hanging out, who have no affiliation, and assume that they are the enemy. There's too much room for error because their tactical commands were very vague. So yes, the higher ups like to blame Charlie Company for what they did that day, and they are to blame because they were the ones on the ground doing what they did. But when you look at how they were being trained, what they were meant to be focused on, what these men were going through, and how that information was disseminated from the higher ups, it is easy to see how a massacre of this magnitude could happen. That's all I'm saying. Okay? Everyone needs to be held accountable. If we're going to hold one, we're going to hold all. It wasn't just Charlie Company. It was a whole American military industrial complex and the way that they trained these soldiers. Period. We shouldn't even been there. Period. So, as I mentioned before, Lieutenant Callie, who was a disappointment to say the least, he is seeing this situation as an opportunity to get the spirits up of Charlie Company. We're going to get the people that tortured that one soldier months ago. We're finally going to get our revenge. I'm going to be a lead on this, and I'm going to earn my respect. I'm going to make sure this goes down flawlessly, right? That was his mindset. 8 minutes, touchdown. The 22 helicopters touch down. And they start to get in their battle formations and start to approach Pinkville, aka My Lai. So they're walking, they're doing their tactical shit. There's helicopters up above, being wary, getting, radio signals about what's going on. And as they're approaching, there's something strange that's happening, which is there is no enemy gunfire at all. They are not encountering any enemy gunfire at all as they're approaching this. And that's the assumption, right? Everyone went into town to do the market. All the good people and innocents left to go do the market stuff. So if we're approaching, if they have the lookouts that they claim they have, they would see us approaching and would probably be in their own battle formation. So they would be shooting at us. There was no enemy fire as they approached. Strike one. To me, no, more like strike 50, but strike 2 in terms of how I'm telling the story in this case. If you're not receiving any enemy fire, my natural assumption would be, okay, maybe our information was wrong. It doesn't seem like, the enemy is here, because that would be the perfect way to pick people off, is to fire. And then whoever makes it through, then you fight one-on-one, or you explode with a grenade, or you shove into a booby trap, what have you. But that makes sense. You don't let the enemy fully approach and engulf your village and then decide to attack them. That's not how it goes. So my mind, and of course hindsight is 2020, is there's zero enemy fire, which could be indicative that our information is bad. So let's take a beat and investigate before we go in hot and heavy. No, that's not what happened. They approach the village, no enemy fire, and what they find is that the village is full of elderly people, is full of children, is full of women, is full of people eating their breakfast, and they're just as confused as the soldiers, like, what are you guys doing here? What's going on? No one had left for market that day. So everyone that was supposed to have evacuated to the marketplace was still there, still eating, still having community. The kids were running around, the elderly were around. And so again, another point of concern. These are the exact people that the higher ups described would be away right now. They are not supposed to be here. They're supposed to be at the market. So if they're here, then again, that information, that intel is bad. It's confirmed that it's bad because they said these people would be gone and they are not. So to then carry out the orders based on bad intel, to me, makes a bad soldier. You're not using your context clues. You're not understanding the moment. You're not understanding that just because you were given orders, shit changed. That intel was bad. But of course, Callie, with a chip on his shoulder, takes it upon himself to carry out the orders, right? So again, based on the very vague tactical operational orders, one of the soldiers said, if they're here, they must be VC, and then kills an old man. Then starts a 4-hour-long killing spree. Brutal shit. Not just a shot in the head, humane type shit. This was gutting people, gang raping people, throwing babies into bayonets, stabbing children, blowing up people, having a baby hold a grenade. Very gruesome and violent. When I say violent, the most depraved ways you can think about killing people, they were doing that to elderly people, women, and children. Okay, so again, there's so many ways that this could have gone, and this was the way that it did go, because again, the confusion, the paranoia at all times, the vague tactical telling of what they're supposed to do, the bad intel, all of that was a point of concern for them, or Lieutenant Callie, to say, you know what, I don't think this is right. Let's go back. I don't think we got the right intel. Let's just leave these people alone. One person looks at a Vietnamese person eating breakfast, a Vietnamese elderly farmer, and says, he's VC, stabs him, kills him in front of everybody. And everyone's like, well, it's time to go. So they go crazy. Now, they can make as many excuses as they want to, but when you're gang raping a child, or you are handing a baby a grenade, all excuses go out the window for me personally, because there's ways to get the proper information, and it has already been confirmed the intel you're basing your operation on was not correct. So to approach it like it was correct is hella shady, and really, 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 really shows how depraved Charlie Company had become. Period. How desensitized to death, how mentally ill and traumatized these men were. Not saying that they don't have any responsibility for what they did. They hold the most responsibility. But that being said, there are so many ways it could have gone, and they chose this way, which is the craziest thing to me. So again, imagine this for 4 hours, the most brutal shit that you've ever experienced, that you've ever seen, just brutal killing. Now, a couple of the men in Charlie Company participated and then kind of saw what was really happening, the real optics, and they stopped. Some of them didn't participate at all, but none of those groups of men, put their gun to the men that were fully taking advantage of this situation and said, you need to fucking stop. They didn't do that. So they let the killing go on, but they were kind of like, this is bad, dude, and just let it happen to these children. Callie was killing children one by one brutally. They were lining all the men up and all the women and shooting into the crowd and killing these people. Eventually they got everybody into a drainage ditch and started shooting into the drainage ditch, killing off as many people as they could. People were hiding under dead bodies. People were hiding, it was complete mayhem, complete chaos, complete and total brutality. For real. The sickest kind. Just sick shit that you wouldn't even be able to come up with in your worst nightmare. These men were enacting on these elderly people, these women, and these children. Period. Now, like I said, some people were like, this ain't cool, or some people would say that, but they weren't trying to do nothing to kind of stop anything. They weren't trying to get between these soldiers that were bloodthirsty and, killing these people. They were just like, well, I'm not doing it, so it doesn't really apply to me, kind of thing, right? Except for one particular soldier who is the highlight of this story, but also this story has really no highlights. But he, in particular, did something that a lot of these guys didn't have the courage to do. And his name was Hugh Thompson Jr. Let me just make sure. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so there's a man named Hugh Thompson Jr. He was a helicopter pilot, same age as Lieutenant Calley, 25 years old. He was supposed to be flying above the situation at My Lai to be able to radio down to the people on the ground and say, okay, they're moving into the trees here, they're moving north, this is where the longitude and latitude of where they are, this is where they're escaping to, blah, 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 and give them points to be able to effectively attack if this really were a tactical mission, right? So he's flying ahead, he's flying, and they're flying low so they can see where people are going, right? He's flying. His crew in his helicopter immediately is like, there's no gunshots. What's going on? There's no gunshots. There's no enemy fire. Why are they firing their guns? What's going on, right? So Hugh Thompson is kind of like, this is weird. Something is wrong. So he flies closer and he sees an elderly woman raising her hands like, please, please help. She was hurt. So he drops a smoke bomb because he sees an elderly woman. So he drops a smoke bomb and radios the team like, hey, we need a medic. Someone was shot, elderly woman. There's a smoke bomb. You can see where she's at, type thing. Thinking that the men in Charlie Company on the ground were doing right by these people, right? So they fly down, they wait there until one of the men from Charlie Company comes to address the situation. And Hugh Thompson watches this guy shoot this woman in cold blood between the eyes. Okay? Didn't say shit. Didn't try to see what was going on. Just shoots her right between the eyes in cold blood. So now Hugh Thompson's like, oh, I know what type of time we're on. He gets into the helicopter, right? And he starts to get into, okay, what they're doing down there is wrong. We need to find a way to stop what's going on. And he basically turns to his crew in his helicopter and is like, yo, if you're with me, you're with me. You see that? This is fucked up. We have to intervene. We don't give a fuck what goes down, but we are making sure that we are not a part of this and we're going to put an end to it. Point blank, period. So he made a commitment to his crew. His crew was all on the same type of time he was. So they start what they do. So basically, Thompson goes and lands his helicopter near one of these drainage ditches where they're committing massacring these people, and points to the fact that there's 150 dead bodies in this drainage ditch. And he's like, what's going on? To the nearest soldier. He sees someone wounded and he's like, help them. And the soldier's like, well, the best way to do it is to put them out of their misery, and continue shooting into the drainage ditch. So he's like, what is happening? So eventually Lieutenant Calley comes up to him. At this point, Lieutenant Calley is credited with killing 100 people. He had already killed 100 people. He comes up to him and Thompson's like, we need to help the wounded. What's going on? What happened? Trying to get the story, trying to still see, okay, is there something I didn't notice? Maybe there was an attack and it went south or whatever. No. Calley is like, we're not helping these people. Why are we helping these people? So that's when Hugh Thompson kind of is like, oh, I see what this is. You are doing this unprovoked. Okay, I need to do what I need to do to make sure that I save at least someone from this situation, right? So basically, Callie gets into his helicopter with his crew of men. They go back up to try and see if they can save or help anybody. At that point, all those people were dead. So he goes up to try and see, okay, can we get some civilians? What can we do? What can we do? He sees 9 civilians running and 10 soldiers following them running with their big guns. And he's like, we're not doing this. I've seen enough death. You guys are fucked up. You guys are fucked up in the head. We're not doing this. So he lands his helicopter between those 9 civilians and those 10 soldiers, right? And the soldiers are trying to get buck with him, like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're letting them get away. And Callie points his gun, and all his men point their guns at these men like, what are you doing? No, you're not killing these people. And so they basically stay in that stalemate like that. And, there's a culture in the police department, any kind of armed service or whatever, where you don't turn on your own. We are loyal to each other to the end, the blue wall of silence. So the fact that Hugh did that could have led him to be killed based on the fact that these men technically were carrying out the orders of the higher ups, even though those orders were wrong based on terrible information and vague. So Hugh going and doing his own thing and then pulling a gun on his fellow soldiers could have landed him in jail and could have landed him dead. And it would have been totally fine if that happened. Long story short, he was able to call another helicopter pilot who's nearby, who he knows well, to come and take some of the people up. They take these people, they fly them somewhere, and he's able to save only those 9 people. The rest of the people are done for. The rest of the people were completely massacred, completely killed, blown up, raped, all of the things that you can imagine, and then times that by a trillion. So, shouts out to Hugh, but also only 9 people. You know what I'm saying?
Get inside both Song Mi and My Lai and files this report.
I first visited Sean Mi Hamlet nearly 2 weeks ago. Since then, there have been a few changes. For one, the South Vietnamese version of winter has set in. And for another, the story of what happened at My Lai has become a little bit more difficult to get. The man who first told me about the incident at My Lai isn't here today. For some reason, he was called back to province headquarters. No one knows why. But Ha Thi Quy was also at My Lai that day nearly 2 years ago. Ha Thi Quy is 44. She looks 64. Ha Thi Quý's 24-year-old daughter died there. Her son had part of his hand shot away. Ha Thi Quy was shot in the hip. She says it was American soldiers who shot them.
She doesn't know why. They just called them to come and sit down. She says they sat down, and including a monk. There was a monk there, and then proceeded to shoot them all.
Ha Thi Quý's story was cut short by village officials. The villagers were ordered to shut up. ABC was told to stop filming. 2 weeks ago, no one cared. But that was before the Vietnamese government officially announced that civilians were not killed by Americans at My Lai. The hamlet of My Lai is about a mile from Son Mi refugee village. There isn't much left of My Lai, some walls, piles of rubble, and graves. But some of My Lai's former residents have begun returning to work in their fields. 60-year-old Trung Thi Tung is planting rice near the ruins of her home and the graves of 3 members of her family. Trung Thi Tung doesn't hate the Americans. She doesn't want to see anyone punished, but she does think the village should be repaid somehow. There's really no way to repay Trung Tan. Trung Tan is 12 years old. In March 1968, he was at the market. He came home to find his entire family, mother, father, and 2 brothers, had been killed. He ran away. Neighbors buried the bodies. Nguyen Thi Tan is luckier. She still has an older sister, but the other 5 members of her family were killed. All of the people of My Lai tell the same story. Their hamlet was destroyed deliberately by Americans. This, they say, is one of the graves of one of the victims of the alleged My Lai incident. There are 5 graves here, scattered all around. There are many more. But it's been 2 long years, and nature has reclaimed, as you can see. 2 years is a long time in South Vietnam. This is Don Baker, ABC News, in what used to be My Lai.
So the massacre happened in 1968, and it wouldn't be until 18 months later that the American public knows what happened at My Lai. Now, that wasn't by coincidence or accident. Hugh Thompson made several complaints and talked to whoever he knew in order to get these complaints heard and investigated upon. Nothing was happening, nothing was moving forward until, and this is where the whimsy of life comes into this story, right? Okay. So, different timeline, okay? Imagine two men who used to train together in Vietnam, for Vietnam, got into different, areas, haven't seen each other since their training, walk into a Vietnamese bar and run into each other, okay? Opening to a terrible joke, but imagine that. This is the straw that broke the camel's back that made the American public the wiser to what happened. So let's talk about it. So basically, Ridenhour, a man named Ridenhour, came into a bar, saw a friend he used to train with. They get a beer at the bar and they start catching up. And Butch, which is this guy's name, it has had one too many and basically is like, did you hear what happened in Pinkville? And then Ridenhour's like, no, what happened? Mind you, Ridenhour is cynical. He does not support the war. He's not one of those. So he's kind of like, I'm trying to get in, do my quota, and get out type vibe. So he's kind of like, no, I didn't hear what happened. So Butch was like, we went in there and we killed every fucking body. We killed women, kids, elderly people. We killed every fucking body, like boasting about it, drunk in this bar. So Ridenhour is like, what do you mean? What happened? So Butch goes through the whole story about how they were innocent people. They go in, they murdered all these people. That was their, they were told to kill anything moving, and they did it. They killed over 500 people, and he was bragging about it, right? Ridenhour kind of like slinks away from the conversation, leaves, and is so fucked up by what he heard that he basically starts his own personal investigation with people he knows that were a part of Charlie Company that he used to train with and has connections with, and starts asking around. A lot of people were very tight-lipped about it at first, but then he was able to get in contact with some guy he knew as a Mormon who was very truthful, and the guy was like, yeah, I was there. It happened. I live every day in guilt. I killed people in that. It's what happened. Yes, it's what happened. So then Ridenhour's like, so Butch wasn't just drunk making up shit. This is really what happened. So once that guy talks, a lot of other people start to talk about their regret, about the fact that it is true, and the whole story is starting to take shape. And Ridenhour is writing all of this down, right? He's keeping note of what everyone's saying about what happened in Pinkville. Ciao. So he wasn't vibing with it, of course. He does his investigation and basically writes a 5-page letter to all the high-ranking people in Congress, people in the media, all these military people, this scathing 5-page letter. And mind you, he only has a fraction of what really happened, right? He doesn't have the whole totality of the story. But based on what he investigated, he puts together a 5-page letter, sends it out to all these places, and it becomes a catastrophic national disaster, national emergency, period. He exposes it. He's a whistleblower, baby. And that happened on March 29th, 1969. So a year after basically the actual massacre had occurred. So that's happening over here, right? And then the massacre happens. Thompson is constantly reporting to his higher ups. This is what happened. We complaints, ignored. Then this guy comes, Bloom, drops a letter. It becomes explosive. Everyone runs. It becomes an international story, national story, and everyone's looking at the American government like, what is happening? What are you doing? What's actually happening in Vietnam? What are you doing to these people? What's going on? This is not what we are taught an American soldier is supposed to be like, because mind you, this is deep in the post-World War II, bliss, sinking in the bliss of us being the winners of that war and looking like the heroes, the white knights who came in at the last second and saved all of Europe kind of thing. So that's the trope that people are working with in terms of the American soldier. So them being in Vietnam, they're thinking these people are white knights saving these people from communism. Oh my God. When in reality, these are depraved, traumatized young men who were plucked because of whatever circumstances, thrown into a situation that America had no reason being in, had no understanding of the depth of, and were completely fucked up by that, right? So this broke that. Then, obviously everything starts to converge, right? And, it becomes a national fucking news story, right? So what is later found out is there is a massive, massive push to cover up what happened at My Lai, including Richard Nixon. Nixon was a part of said cover-up to try and bury any evidence of what happened. But because of Ridenhour's explosive letter that became public, now it's all open. Now the people are demanding transparency. The people are demanding action. So all 100 of those men who were part of Charlie Company or whatever were taken into custody. Only 14 men were given charges, but all of those 14 men were acquitted, completely acquitted of all charges and all of involvement of what happened. So there's that. All of them were acquitted except for Lieutenant Calley. Lieutenant Calley was made the scapegoat, but definitely was the ringleader in terms of the violence perpetuated on that day. His original sentence was life in prison, but through many appeals and many, help from higher ups in the government, he was able to reduce that life sentence to a few months, and he was completely free by 1974 to live his life and exist completely free. And he still maintained his innocence till he died, which is crazy. You killed 100 people. The fuck? Now that's how that story ends, right? Which is absolutely bonkers and insane, but not insane when you understand that this is a country built off of genocides and violent acts like what happened in My Lai. It's not out of character. The people who are in control of this government, even now as we speak, are descendants of people who thought it was okay to rape, pillage, poison, kill, all of this stuff to the people who were already living on this land before. So it's not far-fetched to think that the rationality of that type of level of violence is in their DNA to believe is okay. Not to mention slavery, not to mention all the police brutality that's happening now. There is a line here, a legacy of extreme eradication, genocidal tendencies, and violence that a particular group of people in this country like to consistently fall back on and like to scare us with. Okay? And now I'm preaching, child, because I'm feeling a type of way. Now that we have all these mass shootings happening every day, and we're in war. Okay? This is what our version of genocide is looking like right now. And what happened in My Lai is no different than what happened to the Native Americans, is no different than what happened to the slaves, is no different than what happened to the Jewish people by the Nazis. It's no different. And it's always the same people who perpetrate it and people who are victims by it. It's no coincidence. So all I have to say, people, is stay woke, learn your history, learn about shit like this. They don't tell you shit like this in school for a reason. You need to make the connections on your own. Step out of your zone and think of history, world history, thematically. Who is the perpetrator of the violence? Who continues to attack people unprovoked? Who continues to be the people commanding the strings of genocides across the world? Who is it? Exactly. Think about that. Understand that. But understand also there's a lot to be learned about this time period. There's a lot to be learned about Vietnam, and there's a lot in the war in Vietnam, which is why I did another Vietnam-based Asian American Pacific Islander History Month True Crime and Society episode, because there's so much There's even more than this. But, next year I'm going to spread out, maybe talk about some different things. That being said, maybe I'll talk about Hawaii. Anyway, put your ideas down below. If you like the video, please like the video. Please comment on the video. Please interact with this video. Please press that bell notification and that subscribe button if you are new here. Again, all of my socials are in the description, so check me out. Follow me, all of that on all of those things. And look out for new interviews, look out for new stuff, and support my videos. I really love you guys. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for supporting this channel. We are in a melding kind of vibe right now. I'm trying to build more my consistency. I'm trying to build up my content. I want to get a new camera. I want to get new editing software. We're building here. We're building community. And so if you have any suggestions for me, if you have any cases you want me to go through or talk about, please don't hesitate to write on my community tab. I will put a post up asking for suggestions, of course. That being said, I love you guys so much. And without further ado, Black Lives Matter and free Palestine until it's backwards. Love you.